The envelope felt heavier than it should have. It was just paper. Really one of those glossy blue sleeves with the airline's logo embossed across the front. But when I opened it and found it empty, my fingers tightened around it like it might still give me something. A mistake. I thought, a glitch. Surely they'd fix it. "Mom," Grant said, not meeting my eyes. "There's no ticket for you. Just go home." The words didn't make sense at first. He said them like they were logistical, like telling someone their parking meter ran out or their lunch order got mixed up. Just go home. I stared at him, waiting for a wink, a joke, a laugh, but he'd already turned toward the gate. Karina was busy adjusting Elsie's headphones. No one looked back. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why. I just nodded, turned, and wheeled my small suitcase through the crowd. The click of the wheels against the tile echoed louder than my heartbeat. I passed families huddled together, snapping photos, waving flags, clutching passports with excitement. No one noticed the older woman walking the other way. The shuttle to long-term parking was nearly empty. I sat by the window, one hand still holding that useless envelope. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when I pulled out of the airport lot. Not when I turned onto the highway heading east. Back toward Liberty Lake, I just drove. At home, I carried my suitcase in slowly. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place I'd imagined being filled with souvenirs and laughter. I unzipped the suitcase, folded sweaters, a lavender pouch, the little travel alarm clock I hadn't used in years, and the passport. Brand new, never stamped. I placed everything back into the drawers like I'd never packed at all. Dinner sat untouched on the counter leftovers I didn't bother to warm. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, the clock ticking above me like a soft metronome. Then I walked into the living room and sank into my old chair, the one by the window. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the rose bushes I hadn't pruned in weeks. My voice broke the silence once. Barely a whisper. I should have known better, but I wanted to believe. The lights stayed off. I didn't need them. I sat in the dark long enough to feel everything I'd tried to hold back. Then I reached for the old journal in the drawer beside me, the one with Grant's name on the first page, written in blue ink from the day he was born. I turned to a blank page. The house smelled like baked apples and rosemary. It was family day. A tradition we'd started years ago after too many holidays were spent apart. Grant had insisted we gather at his place this year, just something cozy. He said, I brought my sweet potato casserole and tried not to overthink the sudden warmth in his voice. Karina lit the candles before we sat down. Elsie wore a headband with tiny stars and barely looked up from her phone. But the table was beautiful. And for a moment, I let myself enjoy it. Midway through dinner, as the conversation drifted between updates and compliments, Grant cleared his throat and looked around the table with that presentation smile I'd seen since he was 10. I've been thinking, he began, how amazing it would be to take this family somewhere special. A real memory maker. Europe, Rome, Paris, maybe even London. All of us. Karina touched his arm, beaming. It's something we've wanted to do for ages. A real bonding trip. I paused, my fork hovering above green beans. That sounds lovely, I said slowly, but I don't know if my knees would forgive me. That's the beauty of it, Grant said. We'd take it slow. Wheelchair access, elevators, room service. We've thought it through. My sister-in-law Dana jumped in with a nod. Mom, you've never left the country. It's time. Even Elsie chimed in, barely audible. It'd be cool. I looked down at my hands. My travel shoes were still in the back of my closet, dust on the soles. It had been years. Still, the way Grant looked at me, it reminded me of a boy who used to bring home crayon drawings of castles and sign them. For Mom. Then Grant added casually, We just need a bit more to lock in the deposits. Only about 20. The rest is covered. My stomach turned. 20,000, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You'd be gifting this experience to all of us. You always said family was the best investment. Karina smiled gently. Elsie needs to see where her roots come from. You could give her that. I should have asked why the gift had to come from me. I should have asked why no one else at the table offered to share the cost. But Karina's voice had that soft insistence, and Grant was already talking about museums in Florence. The next morning, I called the bank, transferred the funds, labeled it in my ledger family trip, Europe. I even marked the date with a heart. I stood a little taller that day, feeling seen, included. Later, over coffee, I told Maureen what I'd done. She didn't smile. If they wanted you there, she said, stirring her cup, they wouldn't have made you pay for it. I didn't answer her. I just stared at the steam rising from my mug, already cooling too fast. The next day, I opened my suitcase. I was ready before anyone else. The sun wasn't even up when I slipped on my navy cardigan, the one with gold buttons down the front, and checked the zipper on my travel bag for the third time. I'd packed light 2 sweaters, a pair of slacks, my comfortable flats, and a small bottle of lavender lotion. Just enough to feel part of something, just enough not to be a burden. No one noticed when I came down the stairs. Grant was pacing, barking into his Bluetooth about seat assignments. Karina was reorganizing her skincare pouches. Elsie sat by the door, scrolling, earbuds in. I offered to help carry a bag and was waved off. At the airport, I trailed behind them, my small suitcase clicking over the tiles like a polite afterthought. All around us, families posed for photos. Fathers lifted toddlers onto shoulders. Mothers adjusted scarves and passports. I tried to smile, tried to pretend this was one of those moments. We reached the check-in counter. Grant leaned over and began speaking to the clerk in a low voice. I stepped closer, catching fragments. Not on the manifest, system error. Probably too late. My stomach tightened. What's going on? I asked, keeping my voice even. Grant turned to me with a calmness that felt rehearsed. Looks like there's been a mix-up with your ticket. Mom, it didn't go through. Probably just a glitch. I looked at the clerk. She wouldn't meet my eyes. But I paid, I said, louder than I meant to. I gave you the money. Grant gave me a tight-lipped smile, placing a hand on my arm like I was a child about to overreact. And we're grateful. Truly. But this trip, it might be too much for you. Long flights, lots of walking. Karina and I were talking. And maybe it's better this way. You can rest. We'll bring back photos, souvenirs. Karina nodded, already pulling her boarding pass from her bag. I stood there, one hand still on the handle of my suitcase. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply turned around, walked away from the counter, and didn't look back. The sliding doors opened to cold air. I stepped outside into it, letting the wind sting my face. It was the only thing that felt real. By the time I got back to the parking lot, the sun had climbed over the horizon. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before turning the key. The radio played something cheerful I couldn't hear. I pulled onto the freeway, the airport shrinking behind me, and drove home in silence. I didn't cry when I got home, not even when I passed the empty coat hook in the entryway where I'd meant to hang my travel jacket. I placed the suitcase by the stairs and didn't touch it again. Instead, I trimmed the roses by the back fence. The wind had snapped one of the longer stems, and I cut it clean before it could rot the rest. I swept the porch. I baked a cherry pie I didn't eat. I flipped through an old journal and reread an entry from when Grant was 12. Something about a science fair and how proud I'd been. That night, I made tea and opened my laptop. I typed slowly, pausing between each word, Elder Financial Exploitation, Washington State. The results came fast. Legal codes, warning signs, definitions. One phrase caught me: deceit under the guise of affection. I hovered over the red X in the corner of the browser. My finger almost clicked it. But something held me still. I scrolled again. A number blinked on the screen. Office of Elder Justice, Spokane Division. I dialed. A woman answered and transferred me. The next voice was male, steady and unhurried. "This is Dorian Beck," he said. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the dinner, the deposit, the empty envelope, the smile that wasn't really a smile. I told him about my lavender lotion and the passport I'd never used. I told him how it felt to sit in my car, watching the airport disappear behind me, wondering what kind of mother gets turned into a transaction. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a quiet moment before he spoke. "It sounds like you trusted them with your heart and your savings," he said, "and they took both." "I'm not trying to ruin anyone," I said. "More to myself than him." "I know," he said gently. "But you are allowed to protect yourself." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. He asked if he could come by the next day. I said yes, after we hung up. I sat with the quiet a little longer, but it wasn't heavy this time. I went to the kitchen and wrote his name on a notepad by the phone. Then I underlined it. Once, firmly. Dorian arrived exactly when he said he would, wearing a soft gray jacket and carrying a slim black folder. He didn't shake my hand too firmly or speak too quickly. There was no pity in his voice, just clarity, and I appreciated that more than I could say. We sat at the dining table, and I laid out what I had: the receipt from the wire transfer, the group email about packing suggestions, the screenshot I took of the trip itinerary, still showing my name alongside theirs. He scanned each document like he was memorizing it, then pulled out a sheet of paper with a list of questions. "Do you remember the name of the airline clerk?" I closed my eyes. Mira. She had braids pulled back in a gold clip. Kind eyes. He wrote it down. "We'll contact her." We drove to the bank after that. I hadn't been there in months. Teresa, the branch manager, greeted me like an old neighbor, her smile faltering when I explained why we were there. I saw it in her eyes, the shift from routine professionalism to something personal. "I remember processing that transfer," she said, already reaching for the keyboard. "You said it was for a family trip." She printed the statement and stapled each page with careful precision before handing them over. She looked at me. "I'm so sorry." "Leona." I nodded, but I didn't apologize for putting her in that position. We made one more stop. Dorian called ahead to the airline. Mira met us near the employee entrance. Her brow furrowed when I reminded her of that morning. "Yes," she said. "You looked so confused. Your son told me your health made you a liability for the flight. Said you'd agreed to stay behind." She paused. "But you didn't look like someone who knew she wasn't going." She agreed to write a formal statement. Back at home, I made us tea while Dorian sorted documents into labeled folders. He worked in silence, steady and focused. I went to the hall closet, opened a small, locked drawer, and pulled out a photo I hadn't looked at in years. Grant as a baby, wrapped in a flannel blanket, resting on my lap. I sat beside Dorian and held it in both hands. "I raised him to be better than this," I said quietly. He didn't look up. "Maybe you did," he said, but he chose differently. I placed the photo face down on the table and folded my hands. It was time to choose differently. 2, the flight tracker showed they'd landed 15 minutes early. I stood near the arrivals gate, calm in a way I hadn't expected to feel. Dorian was beside me, dressed in a navy suit this time. No blazer, just crisp lines and a quiet presence. He held the envelope in one hand, his thumb pressed against the court seal. Families began to pour out of the sliding doors, jet-lagged parents, sleepy toddlers, friends carrying welcome signs. And then I saw them. Grant emerged first, dragging 2 suitcases covered in Rome and Paris stickers. His hair was swept back, his sunglasses perched too confidently. Karina followed in a long cream coat, pulling a neck pillow from her bag. Elsie walked behind them, headphones on, face lit by a screen. They were laughing. Until they saw me. Grant's smile dropped first. He slowed mid-step, eyes locking on mine. Then he noticed Dorian. Karina reached for Grant's arm. "What's going on?" she whispered. Dorian stepped forward. "Grant Marston. Karina Marston. These are for you." He handed them each a copy of the summons. The airport noise seemed to soften around us. "What is this?" Grant asked, his voice tight. "A legal notice," Dorian said evenly. "Elder financial exploitation, pending civil restitution, inheritance freeze. You have 7 business days to respond. You're suing your own son." Grant turned to me, voice rising. I kept my tone steady. "No, I'm protecting myself from someone who stopped being my son the moment he used me like a wallet." Karina let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This is absurd. You agreed to help. You said it was your gift." "No, I said. You told me what to give and called it a gift. There's a difference." People had started to watch. Travelers slowed their steps. A mother holding a toddler stood off to the side, listening. Grant looked around, realizing he had no script prepared for this kind of scene. "You're embarrassing yourself?" "No," Dorian said. "You embarrassed yourself when you left her at the gate." Karina scoffed, but her hand trembled as she folded the summons and tucked it into her handbag. We didn't stay long after that. Dorian led the way back toward the exit. I didn't turn to look again. I didn't need to, but I heard Elsie's voice behind us, quiet and confused. "Why is Grandma here?" Dorian opened the door for me, and we stepped into the light. They didn't show up to the mediation, not a call, not a lawyer in their place, just silence. As if silence would make the court forget. It didn't. The judge signed the ruling with barely a question. Full restitution, $20,000. Returned within 30 days. And more than that, the estate lawyer filed a successful motion for revocation of inheritance. Grant, Karina, Dana all removed. Permanently. I updated my will that same afternoon. Dorian sat beside me as I crossed out names I never imagined removing. I didn't cry. I just signed, closed the folder, and felt the strange relief of finality. Dorian helped me establish a new trust, my name only. With protections in place I'd never considered before. I listed him as legal advisor. And for financial advocate. I listed no family at all. The months that followed were quiet. I fell into a rhythm of early mornings and small tasks. Reading, gardening. Too many cookies baked and passed to neighbors. Occasionally, mail would arrive in handwriting I recognized. Postcards from France. A letter from Karina written on designer stationery. A Christmas card from Elsie with her name printed, but not signed. None of them said sorry. Not once. I didn't open them. I slid each one into a drawer in the hallway. I labeled it in permanent marker unanswered. At the community center, I signed up for a watercolor class on a whim. The instructor, a woman named Lark, handed me a set of brushes and said, "No judgment here." I painted slowly at first, mostly flowers, a field, a single chair. One day, I painted a terminal gate, a woman in a navy cardigan, a figure walking away. I titled it Gate 14. No one asked what it meant. They didn't need to. When I hung it on the wall at the local library for the spring exhibit, a child stood in front of it for nearly 5 minutes. He didn't say anything, just looked. And that felt like enough. That evening, as the light faded through my living room window, I pulled open the notebook where I kept my daily reflections and wrote one line: let them send what they want. I already answered with silence. The soil was still cold when I planted the tulip bulbs. I wore gloves and moved slowly, knees aching more than I'd admit aloud. My neighbor leaned over the fence and asked, "Planning for spring?" "No," I said, patting down the dirt. "I'm planning for next spring. You plant hope early." The tulips were yellow, always yellow. When I was 8, my mother told me yellow meant hope, not joy. Joy comes and goes. She'd said, hope is what keeps the door open. I wanted that color to meet me every morning when I opened the curtains. I'd begun teaching a free workshop at the community center. Nothing fancy. Just a dozen women in folding chairs, notebooks in their laps, eyes sometimes wet, sometimes defiant. The flyer said, elder boundaries and financial safety. But really, it was about voice, about how to reclaim one when you've spent your life speaking softly so others wouldn't flinch. We didn't talk about my story. They knew enough by looking at my hands, at how I measured my words. Trust becomes a quiet language after it's been betrayed. One afternoon in late April, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it, and there was Elsie, no phone in her hand. No parents in sight, just her, in a hoodie too big for her shoulders. Eyes down. "I wanted to see your garden," she said. I stepped aside. She didn't ask about the lawsuit, or the painting, or the drawer of letters. We walked among the tulip sprouts, barely poking through, and when we circled back to the porch, she hugged me without a word. It wasn't long, maybe 5 seconds, but it was enough to undo something. Not everything, but something. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote, "They never said sorry." But that hug, that was enough. The tulips hadn't bloomed yet, but I knew they would. The promise was buried, not gone. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. The air still held a bite, but the ground was softening. Little things were moving beneath the surface, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. I wasn't hoping for a knock, or a card, or a moment of clarity from people who'd chosen silence. The garden would come back. So would I.